I'm Joe Riley. For the past 6 years, I've been on the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals. For 18 years before that, I was a circuit judge here in Dyer County, also serving Lake County. It was during those 18 years that I really came to know, appreciate, and love Lyman Ingram, who I'm going to interview today being June 24th, 2003. Would also state that this is a part of the Legal History Project sponsored by the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Good afternoon, Your Honor.
How are you today?
I couldn't be better. On the front end, I want to explain that you and I have been friends for at least 30 years.
Every bit of it.
And I think it'd probably be better if I called you Lyman rather than Judge, and if you call me Joe rather than Judge. I think we know each other well enough to do that.
I believe we do, Joe.
I also think perhaps that you'll be well remembered for your life as a lawyer and as a person, as opposed to your life as a judge. Firstly, Lyman, would you give us your full name?
Lyman Edward Ingram.
And where and when were you born?
I was born in Russellville, Arkansas on September the 25th, 1917.
Okay, so today being June 24th, 2003, you're 85?
85, be 86 in September.
I want to go into your family background just a little bit, if you would. Tell me about your parents.
My father was William Thomas Ingram. He was a Cumberland Presbyterian minister. And my mother was Lillian Johnston Ingram, and she was a housewife and mother.
And where were you born?
Russellville, Arkansas.
Okay. Being a preacher's kid, did you move?
Well, not all that much. We moved from Russellville when I was 3 years old and moved to Corsicana, Texas. And then we were there 4 years. I started to school there and finished part of the first grade. And then we moved to Marshall, Texas, where we were for 16 years. And I went all the way through high school there. And
did your mother work outside the home?
no.
Okay. Did your parents have an impact upon your life?
Very definitely.
Can you tell me about that?
I think probably my mother was a bigger impact on my life than my daddy.
Let me interrupt you just a minute and tell the folks that are watching that you are a very emotional person, and it's been a part of your personality both in and out of the courtroom, so they need to be aware of that, and I want them to see that emotion too.
Well, the emotion comes more from my daddy than it does from my mother. Mother was calm, cool, and collected. And she had always, my father was a worrier. He worried about things. My mother always told me, son, don't ever let anything worry you. If there's something you can do about it, do it. And if there's not anything you can do about it, worrying will kill you. So I always took her at her word. And
well, what about your dad? What strong features did you learn from your dad?
He was a strong person morally and physically. He was a good baseball player as a youngster. He started out in logging. His father died when he was 4 years old. And he was in the logging until one day in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, he went down to the Cotton Belt Railroad to saw that they were advertising for a clerk. He went down and applied for a clerk's job down there, and they said, can you type? And he told them no. They said, well, if you could type, we could hire you. He goes to see a typewriter salesman that sold Underwood typewriters. Got a life-size picture of an Underwood typewriter and a typing book. he sat up at night learning to type. I went back and got the job. And he worked there until he started in the ministry. So I thought that was unusual.
Indeed. I want to move ahead a little bit chronology-wise and move to your family situation. You married, and when did you marry?
Married in 1939, June the 16th, in McKenzie, Tennessee.
And your lovely wife?
Frances Rucker she was, and she is still living and still with me.
Okay. And she has worked outside the home, as I recall, during your marriage.
She has. She worked, she taught school. She worked for Schlesinger's here for a number of years and then went back to teaching.
Schlesinger's was a woman's clothing
store. And then she went back to teaching and taught until 75. She quit in 75.
Okay.
She got to where the school didn't make the children mind so well, so she just quit.
And you and Frances had 2 sons.
That's correct.
All right. Can you tell me about your boys?
Eddie, the oldest son, was born June the 16th of 46, and Bob was born June the 8th of 49, 3 years, like 10 days, 3 years later. Bob and Eddie both went to law school and were admitted to the bar.
And I know this is tough for you to talk about, and I want to talk about Eddie for just a minute. Eddie was a year older than I, and I knew Eddie. And I also want to ask you about Eddie in athletics. And we're going to talk about your athletics in a minute, but Eddie had some athletic ability of his own, did he not?
Eddie was an extremely good football player. For his size, it was unusual for him to get a scholarship at the University of Kentucky as a center, weighing 175, 180 pounds. But he went through Kentucky and then went to the University of Tennessee to law school. He was a mediocre baseball player, but football was his best game. He made all state second team in football, made all West Tennessee and all Big Ten as center.
Well, I didn't know Bob as well, but I know he was a fine young man. I recall he came back in here and practiced for a short while.
He practiced for a short period of time, got killed in a wreck just 3 weeks before our election, and that was in 78.
The election of which you speak is when you and I ran against each other.
That's correct, and you beat me.
Well, maybe
thank goodness you made a better judge than I would have.
Well, maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that again in a minute, but I did want you to have an opportunity to talk about your family. Let's go back and talk about your childhood growing up. What were your hobbies?
I started out, my daddy bought me my first set of boxing gloves when I was 4 years old. And I learned to box and boxed for a number of years. I had a lot of boxing. I also played football in junior high school and high school, and college too. I sang in the glee club as a freshman in high school, but I made the football team, and I was the only boy in the glee club. All the rest of them were girls. And I joined the glee club, and the next year all the boys wanted to join the glee club because I had made the football team, and so they started having tryouts for boys before they let them in the glee club. But I did played football and was on the track team. We had dropped baseball during the Depression, and we didn't play baseball, but I did play baseball in a city league. and softball.
Football
too.
continued on during the Impression, and baseball did not?
That's correct.
Is that right? That was in Texas.
That's right.
So you were athletic, and I assume you were active in your church, I know.
I started singing in the choir when I was 12 years old, singing bass, no less. But my voice never did change, Joe. When I was in the 4th and 5th grade, the teacher wouldn't let me sing because I sang 2 octaves lower than anybody else. And as a result, she made me write spelling words, so I did learn to spell.
Your high school athletics carried over, as I understand it.
Right.
And so let me think, when would you have started to college?
1935.
And where did you go to college?
I went to school at Bethel over in McKenzie. The reason I went there, I had a chance to go to some of the Southwestern Conference schools and didn't take it because Paul Whaley, who had a sporting goods store and hardware store in Marshall, knew about Bethel and knew it was our denominational school and that you could play there as a freshman. And he told me that if I was smart, I would go to Bethel to play football and then transfer to Cumberland and play all the way through law school, and I could get by with it. And I did.
I think we left off part of this, and that is apparently, did your dad and the family move back to Dyersburg at some point? Move to Dyersburg at some point?
Right. In 1940, July of 1940, he moved to Dyersburg. I came through here. I was planning on spending 2 weeks here and going back to Texas. I had worked in a Jerry Mann's race for Attorney General of the state of Texas and made speeches. Even though I wasn't old enough to vote, I made a lot of speeches for him all over East Texas. And I had worked for Ralph Yarborough before that, who ran for Attorney General. He came in third.
In Texas.
He came in third, so I worked for Jerry Mann, who had been a football player at SMU, and he got elected, and I had a promise of a job back in Texas. But Franklin Latta, who was a lawyer here and went to Dad's church, talked me into staying in Dyersburg, and I've been here ever since.
Did I understand you to say that you played football in college and carried on through law school?
Right.
How many years are we talking about there?
6.
In other words, in law school, you could still play football. Is that right?
Right.
That's interesting.
If I'd been in a major school, I couldn't have done that.
Okay. Lyman, how about your military service?
I went to the Army January the 28th of 1943. There were 292 of us left here at one time, the biggest group that ever left Dyer County to go to any war at one time. And I did my basic training partly in Miami Beach, Florida. And they pulled me out, found out that I had studied judo under Major Flores, who had written the Army Manual on Defense of the Unarmed Soldier. And when they found that out, why, they sent me up to physical training, and I started teaching a class of MPs there on the beach. I had about 750 of them. And then they sent me to Denver, Colorado, to Buckley Field, where I taught in their physical training school there, but also attended all the other classes there. Then I went to California at Santa Monica. I was there for several months teaching, and then I taught over at UCLA physical training. And one night I came in and I had a letter on my bed, a note to get ready to ship out the next day to Atlanta, Georgia, and found out that I had been transferred to counterintelligence, and that's where I was for the rest of the war.
So your military service was in all how many years?
3 years and 10 days.
3 years and 10 days. Why was it that you chose Cumberland as opposed to some other law school? And when you probably need to explain where Cumberland was.
Well, Cumberland at that time was at Lebanon,
Tennessee.
Number one, it was originally a Cumberland Presbyterian school. And most folks don't realize that, but it was organized by the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Later on, the USA Church got it when the church had to split in 1906. And we gave up, we lost that school, but we kept Bethel. And my grandfather had gone to Cumberland, and Daddy never went to school. He was an educated man, but he never went to school.
Now, was your military service before or after law school?
It was after.
Okay, so military interrupted your
Right.
practice of law then,
Right.
would that be correct?
I was just going good when I had to go to the Army.
Well, why in the world and when in the world did you decide that you wanted to take up law as a profession?
I heard my first trial when I was 7 years old, and I never wanted to be anything but a lawyer.
Was that in Texas?
Yes, sir.
You recall what kind of trial it was?
Murder case. Murder trial.
And from the time you were 7, are you saying that that's what you knew that you wanted to do?
I knew that I wanted to, and if I could get through college, I would be. If I couldn't, I'd probably coach football.
Well, how tough was it getting through college back at that time during the Depression?
It wasn't really all that bad. I don't think it's as hard then as it probably is now. There weren't as many things to do. You didn't have as many automobiles. You didn't have all of the recreations and the televisions and so forth, and it cost you 25 cents a month extra if you had a radio in your room in college. So we pretty well did what we were supposed to do in college, and I enjoyed it. I stayed pretty busy in college. I was on the football team, the baseball team, the wrestling team, the boxing team, played in the band, sang in the glee club and the college quartet, and then I studied a little bit.
I don't see how you had time. Briefly, looking back over your 85 years, has society changed in your view?
Dramatically. Our morals have gone downhill considerably. Women have become more prominent when they were backseat people when I was small. For instance, when I went to school in first grade, Miss Sally Evans was my teacher, and she taught us how to set tables where you were supposed to put your knives and forks and spoons and say your blessing, and you couldn't teach that in school now. Boys could cross their legs, girls cross their legs at the ankles. You were taught things like that in school back in the first grade, believe it or not.
Well, how about your job history? You graduated from law school, then went into the military, and can you pick up there after you got out of the military?
After I got out of the military, I came back to Dyersburg, and the first job that they threw at me locally was they made me chairman of the Office of Price Administration, which was a very unpopular job back at that time, so you had to really be able to get along with people to handle that job, because we controlled and cited people in and fined them for violating the price control that they had at that time.
This was a governmental position?
Right. It was a non-paying position, but I could always get those jobs.
And I recall talking to you the other day, and you were telling me to backtrack a little bit about the bar examination. Will you tell me about your bar examination?
Yes, I took the bar and I typed it because I didn't write the prettiest hand in the world, and I thought it'd be better to type it. And as we handed in our papers after each session, 2 days there, 4 sessions, I noticed that the examiner was opening my paper and reading it. And I was wondering what was going on. I didn't think that I'd done anything that he would be after me about. But when I handed in my last paper, he asked me and a boy by the name of Bob Donahue that also typed his that I'd gone to law school with, asked us to wait out in the hall. And he came out and he asked us if we were interested in working for an insurance company. So the only requirement was that they pass the bar examination. So I knew right then that I had passed the bar, and I didn't have to go through all of that waiting period to find out whether I'd passed the bar or not. I studied for the Texas bar, and I'm sure I wrote a lot of Texas law, but I passed the Tennessee bar.
And you found out on the spot.
On the spot.
A little bit different today, isn't it?
Right.
For the young lawyers. You're, by the way, where did you take the bar?
Memphis, in the Steric building.
Was it offered at different parts of the state back at that time?
Yes, they had them in Nashville, Knoxville, and Memphis.
I want to first generally look over, and you might want to look at your notes if you have any, the various positions that you've had privately and publicly with regard to your legal career.
From a legal standpoint, I guess the first job I had was I ran for city judge in 1952, and served a term. Then I got beat. Roger Mendez beat me, and the day after election, I was uptown shaking hands just like I'd won the election, and ran against him in 2 years and beat him about 500 votes. And so then I ran for General Sessions judge and was elected in 1960. I served one 6-year term. The first term was a 6-year term.
And was that a full-time judgeship back then?
It was a full-time, $500 a month.
How much
if Francis
were you?
hadn't been teaching school, I couldn't have made a living.
Well, how much were you paid as a municipal judge back in the 50s?
$125, and I held court every morning at 8 o'clock, every afternoon at 4 o'clock, and on Saturday mornings I went to the jail and held court, and on Sunday mornings I went to the jail and held court.
And obviously, between those stints, you were in the private practice of law.
Right.
So in all, you started practicing law in 1940, and here we are in 2003. Now, during that period of time, you mentioned the municipal judgeship, you mentioned the General Sessions judgeship. Was the General Sessions judgeship fun for you?
I enjoyed it. It had its problems because we didn't have an attorney general coming to court except on major cases with preliminary hearings. They would come. And very often there's no lawyer on either side of a case. And it made it very difficult for you to do what is required now. What we did more mediation, I guess, than you would imagine. But the main thing that we tried to do was upgrade the judicial system above the justice of the peace situation that we had, and that's what we tried to do, and it did continue to improve.
And when you mention the justice of the peace system, am I correct that you were probably one of the first, if not the first, General Sessions judge at that point in time, were you not?
That's correct.
Because the JP system changed over right around
Right.
1960.
It did in most counties. There were a few counties that retained the justice of the peace for a few years longer.
Did you ever have any trouble? I've heard this story about you. Trouble on one of those occasions when you were both a judge, prosecutor, and defense lawyer too, I guess, with a litigant.
I did. I had a young black fellow that was from somewhere beside Dyersburg and had gotten picked up here, and he was very belligerent in court. And I called him down, and he called me a liar. And that's something, being raised in Texas, you just didn't call a man a liar in Texas. You might call him an SOB, but don't call him a liar. And so I got on to him about it, fined him $10, which is all we could do then. I couldn't do anything, couldn't put him in jail. And he called me a liar again. So I came down off the bench and I slapped the hell out of him. As he got up, he said, something can be done about that. And I slapped him again, and I said, just what? And so it took care of the situation. He acted very nice from then on. I got a call a few days later from Ebony magazine in New York. Judge, I understand that you slapped a young black man in your court. I said, that's correct, I sure did. He said, well, why did you do it? And I said, well, all I could do to him was fine him $10, and I tried that and it didn't work. The only way I could keep order in my court and run it respectably was to slap the hell out of him, and that's what I did. He said, well, you're the first person I've ever called in the South that has shot straight with me from the shoulder. I'm going to write an article and I'll send you a copy of the magazine. And it came, Judge has a unique method of keeping order in court.
Well, knowing you like I do, I know it didn't have anything to do with race. You'd have done the same thing to any other person.
It wouldn't have made any difference at all. I've never had any racial bias.
Looking again at your public career, remembering that during all these hiatus periods you were in private practice, you started again in the public sector, I believe, in around 1978 or 79. Were you appointed Assistant Attorney General?
December of 78. And Wayne Emmons went in as Attorney General, and I was his assistant. And the first thing I did was told Wayne, I said, look, we need to have an open file policy. Let a defense lawyer come in and see everything we've got. We either have a case or we don't have a case. And the best way to find out is then we won't have to be filing all of these answers to motions that defense lawyers make. And that's what we did. And they still have that policy.
It's what's called an open file policy,
Open file
but it
policy.
did not exist until that time.
That's correct.
Now, you also, I happen to remember, ran for judicial office in the summer of 78.
Right.
Would you tell us about that? What made you decide that that's what you wanted to do?
Looking back now, I didn't really think I wanted to be judge later on, but I did then for some reason that I
What office did you run for?
Circuit judge.
And that was the one where you and I ran against each other.
That's correct. We had a lot of fun together, though. And when I lost, I was interviewing people on television that night.
Well, that was wasn't it your job for the many years?
That's right. And Joe didn't come. And I had to call Joe and tell him to come on up there, that I knew you didn't want to embarrass me. But I wanted to interview you just like I would anybody else. Because when a race is over, it's over. When a lawsuit's over, it's over. And you don't live behind anything, you look forward.
Well, you remember the vote was pretty close, as I recall, out of 10,000 ballots.
That's 102 votes different. I know exactly how many there was.
Well, it is hard for people sometimes.
And of course, Bob got killed 3 weeks before the election, and that worked a handicap. As I said, that may have caused me to lose the race, but I was glad it did, but I was sorry he got killed.
And what counties did that judgeship encompass?
Dyer and Lake counties. Of course, there were 3 on the ballot from Dyer County and only 1 from Lake County.
You don't think I'd help the guy from Lake County, do you?
Well, I don't know. I got pretty close to 600 votes over there. But as I've said many times since then, that I was so glad that you did win, because I've had a lot of fun since then.
Well, you know, politics has changed too, and just thinking about that race, it was a race in which the opponents got along.
Right.
Were good friends before and after. Have things changed in that regard, do you think, politically?
Politically, on many races, it has changed. I don't think in our local races here we've had too many situations that have been bad. Most of the people have taken their wins and losses graciously, and that's the way they should be. There's no reason to do anything but back up and start over again if you lose a race, and that's what I did.
Well, you mentioned your philosophy of losing a while ago, and I must tell you that I have never seen anybody in my life that can lose as graciously as you have. I've seen you lose lawsuits and go out in the hall and hug somebody's neck. Tell me about that philosophy as it might affect some other lawyers that are listening to this.
I think that any lawyer that looks back with a bad taste in his mouth is hurting himself. I have always felt like that if you lose something, start looking forward. Don't look back behind you for anything other than maybe try to discover a reason if something extremely bad happened. But I just like to see people look forward and keep going. It's always been my philosophy, and I have always believed that psychology is the best weapon that a lawyer can possibly have.
In what way, Lyman?
And in any way, psychology, for instance, I tried a case here one time and everybody thought I was crazy that I took a assistant chief of police on the jury in a criminal case. And everybody thought I was crazy. But what they didn't know, that assistant chief of police didn't like John Cribbs, who investigated this case.
Who is John Cribbs now?
John Cribbs was a sheriff. He was a deputy at that time, but he later was sheriff of Dyer County. But I knew that he didn't like John Cribbs. And John Cribbs was the principal witness in the case. And
how about Did the times that I've seen you hug people that you confronted on cross-examination, I've seen you hug their neck after you got out of the courtroom. Did that ever backfire on you?
I never did have but one person, one time, I went up to him and I stuck my hand out to shake hands with him. I'd given him a pretty rigid cross-examination. And when I stuck my hand out, he said, if I could get you out in the courthouse square, I'd whip your you-know-what. I said, well, come on, let's go. And he backed out. He wouldn't go. And then later we became friends.
Can you recall any of your early cases, perhaps in the early 40s, about your fees, what fees were back then?
My first fee that I collected on a divorce case, divorces were $25 in those days. There was a woman stuck her head in the office and says, are you a lawyer? And I said, yes, I am. She said, well, I want a divorce. I said, well, come on in. She came in. I said, what grounds have you got for divorce? She pulled out her purse. She pulled out a little twig of hair with a ribbon around it. I found this in my husband's billfold. He's got a girlfriend, and I want a divorce. I told her what it would be, and so she paid me the deposit for court costs was $6 at that time. And I told her, I said, now you'll get your $6 back if you win your case. Well, of course, he's supposed to pay the court costs. Well, as it turned out, he didn't pay the court costs, and I had to give her $6 back because I told her she would get it back. So I gave it back to her, bad as it hurt. I gave her $6, so I got $19 for my first divorce case.
You're relatively soft-spoken, certainly here on camera. Was that your demeanor in the courtroom?
Not always. I could get extremely loud at times. It depended on what I felt like was important under the circumstances and taking into consideration the jury, everything in consideration. Sometimes I have had you to tell me to quiet down a little bit. But normally there was a reason for doing it that I felt like was worthwhile, to make them feel I really felt what I was arguing, that I stood behind it 100%. Now there's another illusion that you can get is from being so soft that you're making them listen to every word you say. So psychologically, you have to judge according to who you've got sitting on that jury. And that's always been my policy, and it's been very successful. I won lots of cases, and lots of cases I got reduced punishment for.
How important do you think in your practice over 60 years was final argument? You started a long time ago, and here we are 60 years later. Did you place much emphasis on your final argument as opposed to just the examination of witnesses?
It depended upon the case and what type of case it was and the charge, and also, again, the jury. There are some juries that you can expect they won't see a little hell raised. And you can feel it. I don't know, I could always seem to feel it. And I've tried cases here, I've tried cases in front of juries in Texas, New Mexico, Mississippi, and Kentucky, Chicago, Indianapolis, and well, I waived a jury in Indianapolis, Indiana, I had a terrible idea up there. I was representing a man that had 3 armed robbery charges. His 2 cohorts, and he was the ringleader, had gotten 10 years each. They had already had their trials. And I walked in, I had a lawyer there associated with me. I didn't know him. I'd never seen him before, but I had to have an attorney from Indianapolis with me. I looked up at they had a special judge that day. The judge was sick and they had somebody else come in. And with this special judge. And on the spur of the moment, I stood up and I said, Your Honor, I'm going to waive the jury.
Did your client know about this?
No, I just stood up and did it. I waived the jury, got through, tried the case, and my client got 1 year in the workhouse. And he was the ringleader. After we got through, I went up and I shook hands with the judge and told him, I said, Judge, I have seen you somewhere before, but I can't figure out where it was. He said, basic training in Miami Beach, Florida. I said, we did basic training in the same outfit.
You didn't remember?
I didn't. How in the world did I waive that jury? The good Lord was just with me. That's all you could say.
During your years of practice, firstly, let me ask you, was it mostly civil, mostly criminal, and what did you prefer?
I preferred criminal. However, I tried a lot of civil cases. I didn't try near as many civil cases as I did criminal cases because we settled so many of those. A lot of those were settled cases. And by the way, I forgot to mention too that case that I had over in the boy that killed his mother. I didn't get a dime, of course, for trying any of those cases I tried back then. But that boy's father sent me a check for $2,500.
These are appointed cases you're talking about. Back in the early years when you were appointed, you didn't receive any compensation, am I right?
No, not at all.
And then
if you spent any money for photographs or whatever, you spent out of your own pocket. None of that was reimbursed. I spent 90-some odd dollars on a rape case that I told you about that I did not get a dime for. State was asking the death penalty, and I got a not guilty verdict. And
well, at some point in time, the state started paying lawyers certain fees on appointed cases. Did you ever have any of those cases where you were appointed?
I did, several of them. However, I never did file for them. But one time, I had 2 young lawyers that were appointed to help me in a major case, and I gave them the $250 that they gave me. I gave it to them.
So you've never taken a dime from the state?
Not a dime.
During your years of practice, did you practice with a firm or were you by yourself?
I was always by myself or had an associate. I worked in the office with Franklin Latta for several years.
Franklin Latta was a lawyer here in Dyersburg.
Right. And then I had Nate Deering in the office with me for some time, and then John Price. But those were just working agreements and not a partnership.
Basically, you've been a solo practitioner then.
All the way. I never even made my own son a partner. I was planning on it, but he didn't live that long.
Well, you mentioned Nate Deering. Nate Deering's a lawyer here in Dyersburg. You mentioned John Price, who is now with the District Attorney General's office in the Murfreesboro area. But Nate Deering told me a story about you, and I want to hear it from your side about your annex, wrestling annex, which we've seen you do around the courthouse for years. You want to tell us about that?
Well, I could hit somebody and it sounded like I've hit them terribly hard, and it doesn't hurt. It makes a noise. And Nate asked me about that, and I was going to show him how to do that, but I said, now, Nate, don't move.
Now, did he have his client with him?
Yes, sir. And Nate made the mistake of moving just a little bit. You don't have to move much, and it just knocked if you excuse the expression, the hell out of him, knocked him down.
But did you explain to the client what happened, that it wasn't your fault?
I did. I went up and hit John Cribbs one time that way in the courthouse, and somebody said,
John Cribbs being the sheriff.
being the sheriff, he said, man, if he hit me like that, I'd have pulled my pistol out and shot him. Well, of course, there wasn't anything to it. It didn't hurt him at all.
You do have some definite opinions about psychology, about, for lack of a better word, theatrics in the courtroom. Did you pick this up at seminars over the years, or is this just a result of your observations?
Result of observations and possibly some connection with the district attorney in Marshall, Texas, when I worked some in high school. While I was in high school, I worked in his office every time I got a chance for free, and I learned a lot from him. He was a big believer in psychological effect.
You've been well known for crying in the courtroom. Would you agree with that or not?
Yes, sir, and if I can get the jury to cry with me, I'm in good shape.
Did you ever have any trouble with the judges trying to stop you from crying?
I've had one judge stop me. His name was Joe Riley.
You know, Lyman, you have tried. Do you have any idea how many jury cases you've tried?
I have no idea, but it would be way up there, because I know one year I tried 92 jury trials in 1 year, and that's an awful lot of jury trials. But I just really don't know. It would run way up.
Do you have any idea how many death penalty cases you've tried? I know you've prosecuted some and you've defended some.
I've defended several death penalty cases. I never had a death penalty case. I never had a life sentence.
You say you've never had a death penalty case. You mean you never had?
I never had a death penalty verdict until you appointed me to help Charles Kelly with the case. I guess that was the last capital case that you tried. And of course, it wasn't my case. I didn't plan the case. I did a good bit of the cross-examination in the case. But there was a death penalty in that case. But other than that, on any jury trial that I had, I never got over 30 years. One time I had others, I had 1 or 2 20 years, and the rest of them were all lesser punishment.
What is it like? There are a lot of lawyers who will be seeing this who've never tried a death penalty case. Defending a death penalty case, can you tell us what it's like? Is it different from a robbery case, or are they all the same?
It is very different, because you know that at the outset, for the state to ask for a death penalty, you've got a rough case to go with. The odds are against you when the state asks for a death penalty. And the reason that the odds are against you is because the jury may compromise on a life, or a life without parole or whatnot, and feel like that they have done you a favor because you didn't get the death penalty. So I think that it's something that you have to really look at. And I never did ask for the death penalty as a prosecutor unless I felt like I could have pulled the switch. If I could have pulled the switch, then I didn't mind asking for the death penalty. Of course, we got the death penalty in Lake County, the only one that they'd ever had up to that time over there. And of course, he died with cancer in the penitentiary.
That would have been in sometime in the 1980s, I think.
That's correct. Never did come close to getting a death penalty, though, in any case other than the one that Charles Kelly had, and I didn't really plan that. I don't know that I could have done any better. I didn't really do any of the planning. We had that case settled, and we thought it was going to be settled. And then a brother of the defendant butted in and resulted in having to go to trial.
Well, as a lawyer who's tried both prosecuted and defended death penalty cases for a long time, where are we now in death penalty litigation? As people look at this film 30 years from now, we don't know what they're going to see. We don't know what it's going to be like then. Where do you think we're headed?
Well, we're going to have to make some changes in our laws, or either the public is going to demand that changes be made in regard to the death penalty. I believe in the death penalty, but as I say, I would only ask for it if I felt that I conscientiously could have pulled the switch, so to speak. Now, my philosophy now would be that since we have DNA testing and all of the things that are available now, that 4 years from the day that a man is sentenced, that sentence ought to be carried out. He ought to be able to do anything it is necessary to be done in 4 years. Some people might say, well, why wait 4 years? But the 4 years is to give every possible chance of something coming up that would cause you to modify that death penalty down to a life without parole. It'd have to be a certainty of guilt, of course. Another thing that I think is that I didn't agree with in 1982 when they changed from the jury giving punishment to the judge giving the punishment. The theory being that judges would be more consistent in giving punishment. Well, they found out that the judges were just as different as the juries were. So if Dyer County wants to be hard on certain offenses, why don't we let Dyer County be hard on those offenses? Then they'll go somewhere else to commit those offenses. I would like to see it go back to the jury fixing the punishment. Now, there's another asset, though, for a defense lawyer if the jury fixes the punishment that a lot of people don't think about. When the jury has to go setting that amount of punishment that they are relieved of now, they may think more seriously about their case and what they do as a result of having to fix the punishment.
Well, that's very interesting. We're coming up on a break here. Let me ask you one more question before we take a break here. You are what I would call a country lawyer. You're not a city lawyer. What about a country lawyer and dealing with jurors in a local community where you've lived for, say, 60 or 70 years?
You have a distinct advantage in trying cases with a jury if you have earned the respect of the people. If you haven't earned the respect of the people and they look down on you as not being honest and forthright, it's going to work against you. And I think it's worked for me. It's been very helpful.
The fact that you've defended those accused of crimes for all of these years, did that work to your disadvantage with the local jury?
I don't think it did. I really don't. I can pretty well, I think you learn to read juries over the years, and I can go anywhere in the United States and pick a jury without having to have somebody get out and investigate and examine the people. And for some reason, there's something about people that I've learned to read. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it came from. It's a God-given gift, I guess. But I've picked juries in other states. I picked a jury in a rape case in Texas that the sheriff was after my client something awful, and one of the best prosecutors in the state. I didn't win, but I didn't lose. I got a 6-6 verdict on a jury, and they never retried it. So it was a win.
Sounds like a victory to me.
It was a victory.
Thank you, Lyman. We're going to take a short break.
Okay.
Be right back with you. Before we broke, you mentioned being a country lawyer. Have you ever had the opportunity to practice in the city?
Quite a bit. I've had trials in Nashville, Memphis, Knoxville, Indianapolis, Indiana, Chicago, Albuquerque, New Mexico.
How'd you end up in New Mexico, by the way?
Well, the first case I had out there was a murder case that they tried to extradite a woman from Dyersburg out there, and I won that case. And as a result of that case, I got 2 more cases out there that people that I didn't know or have any connection with at all. One of them was a man that raped a child, and a lawyer out there told him to call me. A lawyer from Albuquerque referred him to me. That they didn't think it'd be a lawyer out there that would handle that case. And so I went out and I settled that case and got him off with 5 years.
Well, did you feel comfortable when you go into all these the metropolitan areas? Did you feel comfortable?
Felt very, very much at home. I just always felt like I was at home anywhere I was.
Well, what's wrong with living in a metropolitan area for you then, and why didn't you move your practice?
Well, I think that you live closer to the people and know more, a larger percentage of the people that you're surrounded by in a smaller community, and also where you do at least 80% to 90% of your work is in that community. You're better known, you get better results. I think it's some benefit to your client.
Well, how about for you personally? Do you think the quality of life is any better in the country or a rural area?
To me it is, because I've never lived in any place any larger than 25,000. So I really enjoy smaller communities.
How about hobbies? How do you spend your time here in the country?
Well, most of my time I spent coaching Pee Wee football, Little League baseball, things of that type. I had a tremendous boxing team here at one time. I had 2 boxers, only 2 in high school in open class Golden Gloves that both won in Memphis and went to Chicago. So I've always had, as I say, I would have been a coach of some type had I not been able to get through law school.
Well, you mentioned some community involvement, and I just happen to know that you've had a Little League baseball field named after you here in Dyersburg because of your coaching activities. But how important do you think it is for a lawyer to be involved, actively involved in the community?
I think it's real good. I think that you meet people, you become acquainted with people, people have a lot of confidence in you, and also you don't do it for that reason, but a lot of those people serve on juries. Just to show you a quick example, I had a case over in Gibson County. Nobody asked if anybody knew me. I had a lawyer from Trenton in the case also. They asked if they knew him, but the lawyers from Jackson, both lawyers from Jackson, didn't ask anybody whether they knew me or not on the jury. It so happened that one of those men on the jury had moved to Trenton from Dyersburg, worked in the ball program here. One of them I had gone to school with her brother at Bethel. Another one I had gone to school with and sang in the glee club with at Cumberland. And I got the biggest judgment that there'd been in that county up to that time. But they didn't ask anybody if they knew me. I was a nobody. See, if I'd been from the city, they'd been asking about that. But I was just a country boy.
Well, how about the fact that you as a country boy have been practicing law for so long? Has it been a big money maker for you?
No.
Why is that? As many cases as you've tried.
I have made a decent living. I have always charged people in accordance with what they were able to pay. If they were rich, I charged them pretty good. If they were poor, I charged them sometimes very little or nothing. I expect I've done more free work than any 2 or 3 lawyers in Dyersburg have. But those people that you do those things for are the best advertisement in the world you've got, that they refer other people to you. So you get paid. You get paid for whatever you do, or you get punished for whatever you do, some way down the line. It's sort of like I told you about my Bible professor telling me that with my family background, didn't think I would want to practice criminal law, and told me how I could, that the law said that a man had to have a lawyer. The same law that says it's against the law to do this offense or that offense. But he's got to have a lawyer. And if you've got to have a lawyer, it might as well be me. But that the burden was on the state to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and if the state didn't do it, then the man goes free. If you get him out and he's guilty, don't worry about that. God will punish him down the road somewhere. Now that's what you learn in a small school by going to small colleges.
Well, is that a good philosophy if you're a criminal defense lawyer?
I think it is. I think it is. In other words, it's not incumbent on me to prove that somebody's guilty if I'm representing somebody. If I find a loophole in the investigation, and I always investigated my own cases. I never called on Joe in our office to investigate a case for me. I went to every scene personally.
And when you talked about it in your office, you were talking about the criminal investigator
Right.
with the district attorney's office.
That's
when you were
correct.
assistant prosecutor.
I'd ask him to get witnesses appointed and do things like that. But investigations, I did them myself, always.
Do you ever have any former clients come by perhaps years later to thank you for what you've done for them?
I do occasionally. This woman that I was talking about that cut her husband up at Memphis came by while I was in the DA's office and came up and hugged me and thanked me for what I'd done for her. She served 5 years. It was an atrocious crime.
You mentioned a while ago about holding court on Sundays, and I know we've had a fairly recent opinion about holding court on Sundays. Of course, you're talking about years and years and years ago. What was your philosophy, or what is your philosophy about accessibility to the courts?
Back when I was General Sessions judge in the 50s, farming was the big industry here. A lot of boys that worked on farms would get drunk on weekends or go to a beer joint and get in fights and go to jail. They need to get out of jail. They need to go to work on Monday. They don't need to be in court on Monday. So I went down on Sunday mornings and let them, of course, all of them pled guilty and paid fines. It was just a matter of, now, I could have set bonds, but then they would have wasted that money instead of paying fines with it. And farm income was not that good. So in order to be accessible to the public and take care of the public, I felt obligated to do that. And even now, I go down every Saturday and Sunday morning and set bonds at the jail here now. I never miss. And if I'm out of town, I've got a cell phone, I call the jail, I set bonds. If I'm in Florida, Oklahoma, wherever I am, I set bonds every weekend.
Well, I know in the criminal arena that you've tried hundreds of jury trials, and as the defense lawyer, lost a few. Can you tell us about your experience with the appellate courts out of all the jury trials that you've had?
I've appealed 2 cases. One was John Cribb's case when he was with the TBI. He had an accident in Haywood County. He was tried and convicted of leaving the scene of an accident where there was a personal injury. And I appealed it to the Supreme Court. We didn't have a criminal
Court of Criminal Appeals.
Court of Criminal Appeals. I appealed it, and Judge Neal, who was my criminal instructor in law school, was Chief Justice. I won my case on appeal and dismissed it. There was one and dismissed.
And you appealed one other, you said?
I appealed one where a woman murdered her husband in Weakley County, and I defended her. This was a paid case, incidentally. And I got her off with 2 years, same as I did the other boy. But I appealed that for one reason. Her son was in school, and it was middle of school year. And by appealing, she remained out on bond for her son to stay in that school until the end of the school year and not having to move in with a relative and go to another school. And that was the only reason it was appealed. It wasn't appealed to win. I won all of it. I was going to win to start with. So you might say I appealed one criminal case. Now, I've had several civil cases that were appealed, and I lost one of those in the Supreme Court. I won it in the Court of Appeals and lost it in the Supreme Court on a civil case. Tomlin represented the other side. I still think I was right.
Is that former Judge Hewitt
Right.
Tomlin?
That's right.
Who was practicing law back then?
But it was interesting I had one case that I was very enjoyable case. I tried a case in Lake County where Jones had the grocery store out by the lake. His father had lived with a woman over there for several years, a number of years, had several children by him. And when she died, they wanted to bury her with his family and not with the family that he had signed the report cards and everything. He had, and the case went up. They wanted to move him. He was buried by the woman he had lived with without marriage. And I never will forget the closing remarks of the judge that wrote that opinion. Said that Mrs. So-and-so will lie by the body of so-and-so, and there she shall remain until Gabriel blows his horn. I thought it was pretty good.
Did you? Lyman, I've noticed over the years that you seem to have tremendous respect for the judiciary. You were always responsive to the court, never heard you in any way be disrespectful to the court. Weren't there ever some times when you just really wanted to let it fly?
One time, I was defending John Cribbs over in Haywood County, and he was with the TBI.
This is the same case you were talking about a while ago.
And I got a telephone call just before I left the house that a witness that I'd been trying my best to locate was at a certain place. And it was out of town, but not too many miles. So I had to go and get a subpoena and go subpoena that witness to come to court. Well, of course, I was going to be late getting to Brownsville. And as I got closer to Brownsville, I began to worry about what Judge Kaiser would do, because he was tough about people getting to court on time, being very punctual. So, as I got close to Brownsville, I pulled off on a dirt road, and it was in August. And I got out and I ran around the car a few times and then rubbed my hands on the car tires and got dust on my clothes. And I walked in the courtroom, sweaty, dirty, judge sitting on the bench, waiting for me. I said, "Judge, you can't ever tell when you're going to have a flat tire. Mr. Ingram, if you hadn't had a flat tire, I was fixing to put you in jail." So I didn't lie. You can't tell when you're going to have a flat tire. But I didn't have a flat.
You got away with it.
I got by.
Without lying, right?
That's right.
That's the Presbyterian approach.
That's right.
How important is it, Lyman, do you think, for young lawyers to develop a reputation with the local judges, particularly in the rural areas? Does that have any significance?
I think it's highly important, and the reason being this. Number one, every judge that I have known has been highly respectful of a young lawyer getting started. unless the young lawyer gives them some lip, so to speak, to cause them to look at them differently. In other words, judges want to help young lawyers. That's been my philosophy, that I want to help young lawyers. I know the first time that I ever had Ralph Lawson in court.
Ralph Lawson is still a lawyer here in Dyersburg.
A very prominent lawyer. And the first time he ever tried a case in General Sessions Court, I thought, son, my goodness, you'll never make it. He's turned out to be a real good lawyer, so you can see how wrong I was. But he was scared to death. He was absolutely scared to death. Now, I never did have sense enough to be afraid in the courtroom, because I was sort of raised in the courtroom by working in the district attorney's office in Marshall and going to court with him and sitting with him in court. So I was used to it. And I never did have to go through that stage. Now, I'm more nervous when I came in here today than I ever was in the courtroom. A lot more. It just is the difference.
Well, having been around and observed the practice for 60 years, you have a unique perspective. How has the practice of law changed over that period of 60 years, Lyman?
Well, we've got so many regulations and things now that you have to stay right on top of things a little bit differently than what we used to have. I think that we've had changes that have been good. We've had changes that have not been good. I haven't had to do any of this modern divorce business of going through what is required now in some of the divorce cases. But I think we can over-regulate. A lawyer needs to be turned loose to do what he's required to do within the bounds and scope of the legal profession. I don't find that lawyers are now as trustworthy in some instances as they used to be. Lawyers, when I started practicing law, nearly every lawyer that you dealt with, you could put your bottom dollar on whatever he told you. Now, I find that is not always true anymore. Also, we have lawyers that will file frivolous lawsuits that ought not to ever be filed. It may get them a little publicity, it may get them something indirectly, but I could never see filing a suit just to get my name in the paper. And as a defense lawyer, I never would talk with newspaper reporters about my case. Now, you see that so much now. If I'm going to pull any surprises, I want to pull them in the courtroom. Not the way they do now. This thing in California is the biggest farce I ever saw.
I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about in California. I'm not sure they will 30 years down the road. Exactly what are you talking about?
I'm talking about this girl that was supposedly murdered by her husband.
Oh, okay.
And her baby. She was carrying a baby at the time.
Yeah.
And that's just exactly like one major case. What, the Hearst girl, you remember, that was tried out there?
Patricia Hearst.
Patricia Hearst. I believe I could have cleared that girl. And yet one of the most famous lawyers in the United States went out there, had big press conferences, expensive witnesses. If he had gone to the Army and gotten some of those people who teach and train the brainwashing of prisoners of war, he could have come out a lot better than he did in that case, and I said so at the time. I was very critical of him, the way he handled that case, and
You're
he
speaking
lost.
of Mr. F. Lee Bailey.
F. Lee Bailey.
Well, how important is it? You're talking about lawyers and trustworthiness. Have we lost any collegiality among members of the bar? Is that important that we have a closer relationship?
I think that the close relationship is of highest importance. I know I organized a criminal defense lawyers, Northwest Tennessee criminal defense lawyers, when I was in private practice, and we operated for several years. And I enjoyed it. We got together. We exchanged ideas. We would meet over at Reelfoot Lake once a month, and we had a lot of fun. In fact, the judge up at Paris was one of our members, circuit judge, and Henry, and that circuit up there. I think of his name in a minute.
Aaron Brown, Julian Gwynn, maybe?
Julian Gwynn.
Judge Gwynn.
Julian Gwynn was in it.
You've also seen social changes over the years that have affected the practice, the civil rights movement, the more equality based on gender. Certainly, we have more female counsel and judges than we ever had. How have you adapted to these social changes?
Well, you just have to adapt to whatever you're hit with. You know, when I started practicing law, we didn't have women on juries. There were nothing but men juries for many, many years. But you had to get used to women being on juries. You had to change your style a little bit. You had to change to conform with what would be appealing to women. And the same thing that you've got to do now with any other changes that come about from a legal standpoint to represent clients. You have to change with those things, whether you agree with them or not. They are essential. Now, you get out and attract a lot of attention by raising hell in general, or being anti this or anti that. But how much better is it to float with the changes that happen and live with them? If you can't change them, what good does it do to do anything else but float with the flow? And I believe that that's necessary. And I've had to change my feelings and attitude about things in life. I used to think that if a person did certain things, well, man, you didn't need him in your church. You know, it'd be bad publicity for your church. But now we need to get everybody in church we can. Times are changing.
A lot of us have heard the expression trial by ambush, and yet some of us don't really appreciate it. Have the rules of discovery changed, and the access to information that lawyers have now prior to trial?
They have, and discovery, as I say, that's the reason I like the open file policy. If the prosecutor was defeating the discovery situation. Show you an example of discovery for a young lawyer. When Eddie first started practicing law, was Fowler Roundtree there in Knoxville. He had a case.
Eddie being your son.
Being my son, yes. He had a deposition that he had taken, a discovery deposition. That thing was that thick, 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick. And he wanted me to read it. He was real proud of that deposition. I read the deposition, every page of it, every word of it. I got through with it, and I said, son, you've played hell. He said, what do you mean I've played hell? I said, you've tipped everything that you're going to ask in the trial of this case, and you're going to lose it because they're going to be ready for you. You overplayed your hand. He lost it. And he learned a lesson from it. So you can learn from the experience of other people, and he learned real quick.
In a nutshell, what advice would you give a young lawyer, simply speaking?
I would give any young lawyer, number one, why do you want to be a lawyer? If you want to be a lawyer solely to make money, stay away from it. You're not going to be as rich as you think you're going to be. If you want to be a lawyer to help people handle matters of importance to those people that you can give proper service to in whatever phase of law you want to follow, that's great. But if you are beyond helping people, you don't belong in the legal profession.
What is it, as you look back over your career, what about the practice of law was the most enjoyable for you?
I guess I would have to say that criminal law was the most enjoyable. However, I had some civil cases where odds were very much against me that I would win and help people in that way. But criminal law has always appealed to me, regardless of which side I was on, whether I was prosecuting or defending. The criminal law as I saw it, was something that I enjoyed. I enjoyed getting out and working on a case, regardless of which side I was on. And if I was on the defense, I investigated to the nth degree. I was a good investigator. The work that I did during the war helped me a lot because I got the right kind of training in counterintelligence to become a very good investigator. And that's the reason I always did my own investigating. And I think that it's really criminal law is what I was cut out to be.
We'll talk about some of your unusual characteristics. First of all, before I forget it, you're always have been a real fashion plate in front of the juries. And 30 years from now, people may not know about our ties, and you have a very unique way of tying your tie. Would you just show us here? They'll get a kick out of that, I'm sure.
Well, I always said that if some irate husband came in and grabbed you by the collar and wanted to knock the hell out of you, he'd be surprised you could knock hell out of him by the time he grabbed your tie.
Another unusual characteristic of yours that I've seen you walk around the courthouse, and you want to give everybody a massage, the men and the women. Where in the world did that come from?
I used to do a lot of that. It's one of the most relaxing things that a person can have is to relax their muscles. And when I was in college, I used to give those massages on weekends, $2 a piece. I'd have 10 or 12 every weekend. Lawyers in the law school would get drunk and want to get sobered up and feel to go to law school.
We're trying to get your mic back in place.
Trying to get it back in place. I'm trying to get my tie back on. I'll find it in a minute. My fingers don't work as good as they used to.
Perfect. So that's where the massaging came from.
Right. In fact, I had Attorney General over Jackson drive all the way over here for me to work on his back one day.
Also, coming up in the old school, I remember we used to see the spittoons in the courtroom. You're an old tobacco chewer, I know.
Right.
How long did you do that?
I started when I was 9, my first time I ever chewed, and I went for a good while without it because my dad sat down on me about that, and I chewed until August the 13th, 2001, and I quit then. Of course, I chewed in the courtroom till you got to be judge. and you stopped. You said there's 3 things that I did frequently, or regularly almost. There'd be no crying in the courtroom. There'd be no chewing in the courtroom.
Reading the Bible.
And no quoting the Bible. And what I did, I went to Kentucky and got me a book that quoted great men. And I could quote those great men if they quoted the Bible. So I could use that, get by that one.
How'd you get around tobacco chewing?
The tobacco chewing, one day I looked up and you were chewing gum. So I went out and got me
Was I on the bench?
You were on the bench. I got me some double bubble. And I got one of the little plastic cups and sit there, and every once in a while I'd pick it up and stick it up to my mouth like I was spitting in it. You got to looking at me. You finally said, "Mr. Ingram, are you chewing tobacco?" I said, blew a bubble out of that double bubble, and I said, "No, Your Honor, I'm chewing gum just like you are." You never chewed gum in court anymore, but you started using mints. But I wouldn't have done that to anybody else. I think you'd have probably gotten me if you'd been any other judge.
Well, you probably knew me better than anybody else did. Why did you quit chewing tobacco?
I just decided that
Not good for you.
Decided the thing to do. I miss it occasionally, but
Well, you're a great example. You're 85 years old, terribly energetic, still active as a judge here. We hadn't talked much about your municipal judgeship at present, but you're still active. To what do you attribute this energy and longevity to?
the fact that I just never have slowed down. In other words, if you start out at a pace and keep that pace, you just keep going, and I guess that's what it is, because I don't know any other reason. But I can't sit still. I can't sit around the house and do nothing. I just can't do it.
Well, talking about one more courtroom anecdote that I've been told by Judge Charles Moore, who's the General Sessions Judge here in Dyer County, and it's about a guilty plea that one of your clients was about to participate in just a very few years ago. Do you recall what I'm talking about?
I think so.
Well, let's hear your story then.
Well, I had a deal worked out which was very just under the circumstances of this case. And he agreed to it. And then when the judge got to questioning him about it, voluntary, and so forth, he sort of started backing up just a little bit. And he said, I told him, I said, go ahead and sign the paper. And he didn't sign them. I said, go ahead and sign the papers. He said, well, they're trying to railroad me. I said, go ahead and sign those papers or I'm going to slap the shit out of you. He had a good deal. And he signed the papers.
Well, I must say that your story matches Judge Moore's recollection of what he overheard you tell your client.
Well, I hate to say that, but at the same time, that was language he understood. You've always got to talk to people in the language that they understand. I don't care if it's a jury. The reason I don't ever let my wife has never heard me try a case. I will not let her in the courtroom because if I want to cry, she would think that was terrible. If I want to use bad English, because I've got somebody on the jury I want to influence with that particular type of talk, I don't want her criticizing me about it. I might not do those things if she were in the courtroom. And she came to the courtroom with my daddy one time. Dad came back to town after he'd moved to Nashville. He came back to town and brought Frances with him for me to try a case. And I walked over to the judge and I said, "Judge, you've got 2 cases set today. Try the other one." I did not try that case that day, so she didn't get to stay in court. But I do not want anything deterring me from doing what I think I need to do for my client's benefit. And she would be a detriment to me, and she would be my biggest critic.
I want to ask you about one more story. I happen to recall, even though I wasn't involved as a judge, that you got sued here in circuit court just a very few years ago. You were probably about 80 years old at the time. Do you recall what I'm talking about?
Oh, you're talking about the young fellow that's 29 that called me a liar the 3rd time that he called me.
First of all, where did he call you a liar?
We were in the courthouse in the door, in the outside where your office was.
Just outside the courtroom?
Just outside the courtroom, on the inside. In fact, I was sitting in a chair there talking to a young lady. It was John Price's client. And it was her husband that came in there where he had no business. And he called me a liar. I tried to tell him to get out, and he didn't have any business in there. And I told him the same thing I told that other boy about being from Texas. But I let him go to the 3rd time before I hit him. I slapped him and knocked him down. He wore a neck brace for about 30 or 40 days. And I hit him hard, but open-handed. And he sued me for $400,000. And
Did you go to trial in what court?
We went to trial in circuit court, and Judge Akery came down from Union City to hear the case. Of course, he instructed the jury that they must find for the plaintiff because I admitted that I assaulted the man. And the jury went out and came back with a verdict that we find for the plaintiff and fix his damage at 0. So they also, he signed a warrant on me, tried to indict me. And I went in and they had Judge Moore down here from Dresden to hear that case. So I walked in, and they had his family there and everything in a big crowd, and I walked in and said, I waved to the grand jury, bam, I left. And they didn't get the pleasure of hearing it. And then I filed a petition, filed a motion with the form of the grand jury to be allowed to testify before the grand jury, and they didn't indict me.
Let's talk a little bit about your present judicial position, which is?
I'm municipal judge. I call it city judge. It's a little shorter. And also judicial commissioner for Dyer County and juvenile referee for Dyer County.
What about your scope of jurisdiction in the municipal court?
I have concurrent jurisdiction on criminal cases with all cases that happen within or within 1 mile of the city limits of Dyersburg with the General Sessions Court. Then I also have the last Tuesday of each month, I handle child support cases. So I handled 14 of those this morning.
What do you think the major challenge is facing our judicial system today, from your perspective as a judge?
I don't really have an answer to some of the things that I might mention.
Do you think the volume of work is a problem?
The volume doesn't bother me. I can handle volume, but we do have too much volume of cases. Our regulations and requirements are getting more extensive all the time. When I started practicing law, there was one big volume. One big volume was the Tennessee Code. And every time the legislature meets, we change laws. For instance, they're always changing something about drunk driving, and of course maybe it needs to be lowered to .08, and it's going to be .08 starting 1st of July. But I can't quite see that we need all of the regulations that we have. We've got so many. And there's so many requirements now on a judge that you've got to comply with this in order to give this sentence. You've got to do so and so. I don't think that a judge ought to have to go through minute details explaining why he is doing what he's doing in sentencing a person. Don't they trust our judges? Are our judges qualified? If they're not, we better get some more. I know what a man needs in Dyer County when he comes to my court. And that's what I give him. I don't care who it is. I've sent this mayor's daughter, granddaughter, and grandson both off. It doesn't bother. I don't care who they are. Our principles have to be the same for everybody, pretty well. Now, you can't do the same thing to everybody because everybody is not the same. The individuals are different. But I think we over-regulate our courts. I think we're requiring too much. It's just like right now, they say that you got to, a man pleads guilty, you got to go through this jazz of
the litany of rights.
Well, you go through the rights, but the law also says if you don't do it, it doesn't make any difference. Now, what kind of, am I going to do all of that, or am I not going to do it? And am I going to spend another 45 minutes of my time in court going through all of those details when you just get through giving them all their rights to start with, extensive rights? I do it in essence, but maybe I may take a shortcut or two.
We're going to wind down here, and I only have two more questions. The first question is a general question I've heard you ask a zillion times. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you would like to tell us about? Is there anything else that perhaps we've omitted?
Well, that's a bad question to ask me because I might talk all night. But no, I think you've covered things very well, very well. I've enjoyed it, appreciate the opportunity. I don't know that I deserved the opportunity.
Well, I think we'll let people judge that, and I think I know how they're going to vote. My final question for you, Lyman, is how would you like to be remembered?
is a damn good lawyer.
Very good. Thank you, Lyman.
Thank you.
We love you.
I love you too, Joe.